And do we have any public presentations?
Sure. Should I?
Do you have, you can speak up there where people can see you, and there's a microphone. Go ahead and pass that down. Okay. So just as a housekeeping, I've been asked to make sure that we speak into the microphones. So if you can remember to do that. They're pretty loud, so I think they're kind of making their point. They want us to speak into these things. Okay, you have 2 minutes. Thank you.
My name is Dave Kadlachek. I just wanted to point out, this is partly in reaction to a letter in the Weekly a week and a half ago that was talking about how the purpose of electing members of the council should be to get sort of the best qualified, smartest, et cetera. But the actual fact is there's plenty of well-qualified, intelligent people who run for council, and the point is not necessarily to get the most well-qualified and smartest of them, but to get those who best represent the varied interests of the city. There's different groups of people within the city who have different interests. Two of the obvious ones are geographically and race and ethnicity, and those you need to pay attention to. There's other interests, and you need to pay attention to those as well in looking at the systems to use to elect city council. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Okay. Before we start, I want to take 30 seconds and I want to apologize to the group. Last week, I didn't manage the meeting as well as I wanted to. And I felt that we got off track, and I felt that I interjected my personal opinions at a time and place when I probably shouldn't have. I think it was Rex brought something up, and it triggered something in me, and as chair, I should have waited until everybody else had a chance to speak, and I didn't do that. So I do want to apologize for last meeting, because I think in order to get through this, I'm going to have to be a little more focused on getting us through this. We only have, I think, 4 meetings left on the calendar. So my goal is to push things not so fast that we miss things and not so we don't hear people, but I'd like to get to a resolution by the date that we have been given. And I don't want to have to go back to the council and once again and say we couldn't figure it out. Because truthfully, that would be the 3rd time. And I don't want to be a part of the, part of the committee that's the 3rd one that can't come to a consensus when I think with the information we have in front of us, I think we're going to be able to make those decisions that we need to make. So with that, I'll get back to the agenda. So I need a motion to approve the minutes from our May 22nd meeting.
I have some issues with the minutes. Some things that are a little bit nitpicky. It seems like there were 10 people at the meeting last week, but it says motion carried under 1. It said motion carried unanimously 9-0, so that doesn't add up to 10. All the other ones do.
The reason for that is because there was a member who arrived late, and so there was not 10 at that time.
Awesome, thank you. That was just an observation from the minutes. The other one was a more substantive one, which was under number 2. And again, maybe it's just my misreading of the minutes, but it says public presentations, and it says committee members were advised. I don't know if this is from a public, but I remember clearly our city attorney, or interim city attorney, explicit, and please correct me if I'm misrepresenting, Brian. It says recommended criteria include 1, 2, and 3, but I don't believe 2 and 3 were part of the advice from our city attorney.
I don't recall saying anything during public presentations.
Well, that's what's a little confusing, because I don't know if this even was part of public presentation.
That was a member of the public.
Okay, so then it was my misreading of the minutes once more. And then some part of the minutes here in the middle of number 4 that is talking about things that I said, I think is a little bit, I'm even confused from reading what it says. So either I was not making sense during the meeting, which is very likely, but the other scenario is that maybe just in the brevity of the minutes, it kind of lost its meaning where it says, Member Haggag noted STV allows all votes to get counted, while in instant runoff voting, votes can be eliminated. In additional, proportional representation can only be implemented in at-large election systems, which isn't true. Well, and then the next sentence says it could be implemented in 2 districts of 3 representatives. Proportional representation can be done in any system, but it is better suited for systems where there are larger or more available seats at that.
So I think this was captured as we discussed it. Whether it's necessarily right or wrong, it's what was discussed.
I don't think I said that, but that's fine. I mean, the only concern is that it's a misrepresentation of what I believe I said, so.
Oh, so what do you think you said?
God, I mean, it's trying to,
Do you want to strike this out? Because we can strike it out.
if it were modified to say, in addition,
But is that what you said?
no,
Okay, so why don't we strike it out? And we can move forward.
fair,
Thank you.
although it was an important point, but.
Strike this out.
With, I believe, that single correction motion to recommend adoption of the minutes.
Okay. Do I have a second? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, we have a sustained because 2 folks weren't here. Actually, 3, so we have 3 abstentions. I'm not used to asking for abstentions. Okay. All right, thank you for going through that, Hossam. What I'd like to do is move right into our guest speakers.
Sorry, before we move into guest speakers,
Sure.
I would like to clarify 2 things.
Okay.
One, this committee is going to make recommendations to the council, and the recommendations are going to be independent of each other. So we can do a recommendation about districts, and the voting methodology will be an entirely independent, separate recommendation. Is that correct? Or they have to be married together?
I'm open for suggestion, but I think they kind of go together. I think it's kind of a package. One is we're looking at the districting may address the lawsuit if that's what we choose to do. That's one thing, right? But then if we choose the district, then we have to choose how we're going to actually vote.
So
Jody, you're saying no.
So if we have a choice about it, my recommendation is that we independently make a recommendation around districts, and then a separate and independent recommendation about voting methodologies, because if we marry them together, it's going to be much more difficult, I think. Yeah. And I think that a small
Chair?
increment.
This is not on the agenda at this point.
Right?
Oh,
It's-
but before we go into the voting methodologies, I wanted people,
Yeah, that's fine, but we just
Fine.
need to, it's
Okay.
just,
Okay.
to be fair to the public, we really should have a
Okay,
discussion
fine.
like this at a more appropriate time in the agenda.
so when would that be? When,
I think perhaps we would put it on the next agenda to discuss, but if I can wrap this up quick, you're basically saying we should have 2 independent recommendations.
yes.
Okay. And I think we can have that discussion later, but your point is duly noted. I'll make sure that it gets on the agenda, because it's a valid point.
Okay.
And I think there's agreement around the table, and then there's some that are kind of maybe not so agreeable, so let's
Move on. Okay.
let's move on to our guests.
Okay.
And I'd like to introduce Philip and Matt from the Santa Clara County Register of Voters. And I believe in our packet, there was some information that was sent out by the county. So just be mindful that they may be referencing that material, or they may not. So the floor is yours.
Great. Well, thank you for allowing us to be here. I'm Matt Morales, Assistant Registrar of Voters for Santa Clara County. I have Philip Chantry, who's an Election Division Coordinator with the Registrar's Office. Okay, so we've been asked to discuss various different voting methods, and particularly their applicability to Santa Clara County and whether or not we have the technological capability to conduct elections along these methods. So first, before we jump into that, though, I wanted to start off with a few caveats of what we're not necessarily going to discuss tonight. And that's just to give you an understanding of, the registrar's office, who we are, and kind of how we operate. So first off, we're not attorneys, so we're not, we're not going to be giving legal advice or really, qualified to say, does a specific voting methodology, especially when paired with a certain, district type or at-large type election, would that satisfy CVRA or any other law? That's kind of outside of our purview. The second caveat is we are a government entity and we conduct elections. So first and foremost, our guiding rule is to be objective and nonpartisan. So we generally won't discuss, and don't really do research into and aren't authorized to discuss does a certain type of voting method elect or, help elect certain kinds of candidates or help certain kinds of voters or anything like that along any kind of partisan lines or any other kind of lines like that. And then finally, the third caveat I want to say is we are discussing tonight voting methods that are not currently used, or for the most part, not currently used in Santa Clara County. We are the Santa Clara County Registrar of Voters. So to the extent that, we're sharing general research and knowledge about practices in other jurisdictions and other parts of the country and other parts of the world, just, we want to be upfront with the fact that, our expertise kind of begins and ends at the border of the Santa Clara County. So, we do have general knowledge about different voting methods, but a lot of these different methodologies, they've been implemented in different areas, different parts of the world with different little twists and things. So, some of you may have familiarity with different versions of them than or may have a more specific case in mind than just the general information that we're sharing, and we're open to having a discussion about that. So jumping into it, we were asked to prepare just information on a few different voting methods and kind of define what they are and what the differences are. Those are in the memo that we prepared for you. So first off, a definition of at-large election. So that is within a jurisdiction, everybody votes on the same set of candidates. You elect one or multiple. So a multi-seat district or a multi-member district would kind of fall into very similar to an at-large type of methodology. By-district elections would be, would be within a jurisdiction. You carve it up into districts. You only vote on the candidates, within your district. Generally speaking, the way that this is utilized in Santa Clara County right now, these are, a single candidate or a single seat per district. But as I said, you could kind of have a hybrid of the two, which would be, a multi-member district. The third method we were asked to talk about was ranked choice voting. And this is also sometimes called instant runoff voting. So the first two are widely used in Santa Clara County, and I think any of you who voted in a recent election probably are familiar with what they are. Ranked choice voting is slightly new to voters in Santa Clara County because we have not run an election using this methodology. But in short, voters, instead of just picking a single candidate that they prefer, they will rank their candidates in order of preference. And then instead of just tallying at once, after we tally the ballots, the lowest vote, receiving candidate would be eliminated, and their votes would be redistributed according to their second preference, and so on until you end up with a candidate who reaches a certain threshold for election, for example, an actual majority, meaning, over 50% as opposed to a plurality. So that's ranked choice voting. Cumulative voting usually would be used with multiple open seats, so like an at-large election where everybody in the jurisdiction is voting for the same set of candidates, but just multiple candidates, or possibly with a multi-member district. The way that cumulative voting works, though, is the voter has the opportunity, if they have, for example, 3 votes, three selections they can make, they could, currently under the way that we run at-large elections, they would have to vote for 3 different candidates. So candidate A, candidate B, candidate C, with their 3 selections. Under cumulative voting, a voter could actually choose to do make all of their selections for candidate A. Or they could do 2 for A and 1 for B. Or they could still do 1 for A, 1 for B, 1 for C, but they would have the option. So it distributes the votes a little bit differently. That is cumulative voting. Again, this is something that is not currently in use in Santa Clara County. Next up, we were asked about a single transferable vote. So what that means, the ballot in most cases that I've seen, the ballot looks fairly similar to a ranked choice type ballot in that the voter is presented with the same, multiple sets of the same set of candidates and are able to mark preference. The difference is that you set a certain threshold for election, whatever that percentage is. Then somebody who receives more than that threshold, basically their excess portion, so if they needed, say for example, 33% to get elected and they receive 42%, their surplus votes would be redistributed proportionally based on the second preference rankings of the voters who voted for them. So basically, the voter still gets one pick, one vote, but that vote, it's called single transferable because that vote will potentially transfer to another candidate. The way to think of it is, after my candidate wins, meets that threshold for getting elected, now my vote's gonna, if I'm in that excess portion, my vote's gonna jump to my second choice, effectively. It is a slight variation of, some people will consider it a version of proportional representation. It's kind of a way to do proportional representation without a party slate, so to speak.
Can we ask clarifying questions, or do you want to hold the questions?
I prefer to hold them.
Yeah.
Just write it down.
And then the last one we were asked to present on was limited voting. And so that is very similar to an at-large election where you can, where you would have multiple seats, then you have one slate of candidate that's running for multiple seats. The difference here with limited voting is each voter only gets one vote regardless of the number of seats, or has less than the full number of seats to make a selection. So that, for example, I may be a voter voting for a vote for 3 contests where there are 3 city council seats, but I can only pick my one preference. Again, this just results in a different, distribution of the votes. So that's generally, in very broad terms, an overview of different options. Now, some of these, to the question that was raised earlier, some of these do lend themselves more to certain types of of pairing in terms of at-large or district or multi-member districts. So, that is one thing to keep in mind, I think particularly with your city's deliberations. Moving on to the question of which of these can we do in Santa Clara County? Oh, and I do want to call to your attention that we did, as the last page of our memo, kind of create a quick little table to help keep things straight that you can refer to. But generally speaking, when we're talking about, and the one thing that we define in here, the voting methods that I just talked about, some people will call them voting systems. In the registrar's office and really in California, when we talk about voting system, we usually use that to refer to the technology that we use to vote, meaning the hardware and software that actually presents the ballots to the voters and tabulates the ballots. So just to kind of avoid confusion, because we're always going to say voting system to refer to technology, we're using the term voting method to refer to ranked choice voting or single transferable vote or limited voting or cumulative voting or anything like that. And when we say voting system, we're talking about equipment, so currently, our voting system, our equipment, can't necessarily handle all of these types. Some of them it potentially could handle with some modifications, and some of them would require workarounds. I do want to say that we are in the process of looking at acquiring a new voting system that would potentially open the open the doors to some of these options further down the road. But at this point, that's looking like that's at least 2 to 3 years away from implementation. So depending on the timeline and when you guys need to make decisions and when the timeline for adopting and executing those decisions would be, that may or may not limit our capabilities. So the first two that we discussed, at-large and by district, as I said, those are commonly used throughout the county right now. So there wouldn't be any problem with us implementing, at-large or by district elections. Ranked choice voting currently is not supported by the version of the voting system that we're using right now. However, there is a software upgrade for our voting system that would support it. And in fact, it's our system with this software upgrade is what's being used to conduct ranked choice voting in the city and county of San Francisco and the county of Alameda. The one thing that I do need to caution, though, and we go into more detail in this in the memo, and I won't go through exhaustively what the process is, but any voting equipment that we use, any voting system that we use, has to be certified by the state. And further, we need to have use procedures that are certified by the state, and a lot of times the state will apply additional conditions on the use of a voting system. So right now, the San Francisco and Alameda County have conditional approval or certification to use this updated version of the software. So were we to have a city or a jurisdiction that was interested in pursuing ranked choice voting, we would have to apply to the state for administrative approval to upgrade our software in this way. That potentially could be a timely process. It could also have some costs associated with that, particularly depending on any conditions like security conditions or other use conditions or just kind of voter convenience conditions that were placed upon us by the state as a requirement for approval. And if you have further questions on what that process looks like, we can talk about it some more. So moving on to cumulative voting. So this one is a little bit more complex because cumulative voting is not natively supported by our current voting system. However, we have been made aware of a workaround that's currently being used in a jurisdiction in Texas that we've looked at and theoretically could be used with our current technology to conduct a cumulative voting election. There are some caveats to that, but basically what it would be is that when I say workaround, we're essentially kind of tricking our system into doing a cumulative voting. And there is, I believe that there was a handout that we had, a sample of what that ballot would look like, where basically each candidate's name would be repeated a number of times equal to the number of selections. So the sample that you have, it's using the actual city council contests and candidates from last November as an example. So you had 4 open seats. So if you look at the sample, each candidate's name is repeated 4 times. I believe that there were like 14 or 16 candidates. So it's quite a lot. And then there were 4 write-in spaces. So this would allow a voter to potentially mark, each candidate, like a single candidate 4 times, or 4 different candidates once, or any combination of them. Now, when we tally the votes, our system doesn't recognize that each of these 4 instances of a candidate is really the same candidate. So we would end up with a machine-generated report that gives an individual result for each of the 4 instances of each candidate. And we would have to basically publish an addendum to the results after the fact that we're manually are adding up the totals of each 4 instances. This would be a case where we probably would, like on election night when we're updating the results regularly, we probably wouldn't have time to make these manual calculations and post it every time, and it would be sometime after the election that we would do this update. So those of you who've ever taken a look at our official certified results, this is the same way that we handle write-in votes, where somebody writes in a vote and the system can't recognize who they wrote in. So we publish an addendum to it. There were a couple caveats, like I said, to the using this workaround. The major one being, if you take a look at the ballot, obviously repeating the candidates creates a lot of space that gets utilized on the ballot, and it actually, in this case, it pushed it to, if you flip over to the back side of the ballot, you can see the candidates actually continue onto the second page. So this would have pushed right now, in the November election, we had 3 ballot cards front and back, so basically 6 pages. This would have pushed us onto a 7th page, meaning a 4th full card. Right now, 4 cards is the limit for our current voting system without the software upgrade. And we've been trending, steadily increasing the number of contests on the ballot and the number of contests on the card. So there's a remote possibility, but still a possibility that were a jurisdiction or jurisdictions to adopt this very kind of space-hungry method of voting, it would potentially push us onto a 5th card, in which case we would now be up against we would not be able to run that election on our current software. And again, we'd have to go to the state, and that would potentially be a lengthy process. So that is just something that we would have to look at again if a jurisdiction wanted to pursue that. Single transferable vote currently is not supported on the system, although it would be supported when we upgrade to a new voting system. That would be natively supported. But again, like I said, that's potentially 2 to 3 years off. And then finally, limited voting, even though it's not currently in use in Santa Clara County, it would be possible without any workarounds or any modification to our voting system. Essentially, we would just code the election, even though the contest has 3 available seats, we would code it as if it only had 1 available seat, so a voter could only select one option, and that's easily done. So a couple of other things to consider. Actually, the main thing to consider, but beyond all of this, is cost factors. So obviously in the 3 cases where we already have the capability of supporting these natively, the cost is going to, the cost impact technology-wise is going to be minimal. We would still recommend, particularly if anytime that you're changing the voting method, that some voter, education and outreach is advisable. But it would not necessarily be as extensive as in the other cases. For the cases in which we would be needing to radically alter the design of the ballot, though, in particular, I'd be talking about like ranked choice voting or single transferable vote or cumulative voting. We would recommend, in fact, we would insist upon doing a very comprehensive voter outreach campaign to make sure that voters weren't confused by the new design. In particular, anytime that you would have, multiple instances of a candidate name or multiple options, potentially that would be something that a voter wouldn't be familiar with. So we would definitely recommend doing some kind of voter education around that. Additionally, particularly like with the cumulative voting workaround that we're talking about, because it creates a lengthy contest that splits over multiple columns and potentially even splits onto different sides of a ballot, that could be confusing to voters. And we have seen in contests where it does split across, sometimes voters don't realize, okay, if I can pick only 1 or 2 or 3 candidates for this contest, I don't realize that these 3 columns are the same contest, so I can only pick 3 across all columns. They think that I can pick 3 in each column or something like that. So there are ways that we can mitigate this, and we have a lot of suggestions of how we would do that, but this would entail some costs. In addition, particularly with these methods that do increase the real estate on the ballot, there's additional printing costs, additional translation and ballot layout costs that go along with that. And so those have to be taken into account. We don't have very concrete numbers like this is exactly how much extra it's going to cost. So we really can only refer you to like other examples of other jurisdictions that have implemented this. So in the county of Oakland, in the county of Alameda, the city of Oakland, their first implementation of ranked choice voting, and we'll just use that as a baseline. It would be probably similar for these other methods. The county invested the county costs were about $600,000 just for the city of Oakland. They had a couple other cities that were doing it at one time, because I'm trying to compare, somewhat apples to apples. I'm just picking one city. So just for the city of Oakland, the county cost was $600,000, and then which most of that would have been billable back to the city, and then the additional the city took upon itself to invest another at least $100,000 in their own kind of city-branded marketing campaign on top of the voter education that the county was doing on their behalf. That was not quite 10 years ago. I believe that was like 6 years ago, 2010, 7 years ago, thank you. One thing to point out is that at that time, the County of Alameda did not have the same number of languages that they were required to support as we do, so we could potentially have a slightly higher cost based off of that factor. Another is inflation, obviously, media market rates are, have gone up in that time. Printing rates have potentially gone up in that time. So that's a second factor to consider. And then additionally, beyond just the languages that, so we have 4 languages aside from English that as a county we are federally required to support. And then there are 4 additional languages under state law that we provide kind of a lesser degree of support for, but we still recruit poll workers in those languages, and we don't print every ballot in those language, but in target ballot types, we'll print what are called facsimile ballots. So you as a voter would still get a ballot that was in a different language, but you would have a small number of copies of the ballots in languages like Hindi or Japanese or Korean or Khmer that you could use as a reference to complete your ballot. So, but again, that has to be translated, and that potentially entails additional costs. And then the last thing that I do wanted to note regarding costs is, as I said, there may be costs entailed with in cases where we have to go to the state for approval of the voting system upgrade. There may be some costs associated with that, both in the actual upgrade itself, but also potentially, like I mentioned, on the conditions that the state places on us. And so one of the most impactful conditions that the state could impose on us, and we don't know at this point that they would, but it's a potential, is right now we have a central count configuration for our voting system, which means all the ballots in the county, regardless of where they were voted, come back from the polls on election night and get counted centrally at our office. So the voters just putting their ballot at the polling place into a plain ballot box that gives them no feedback in terms of there's no technology associated with it, so it doesn't give them any feedback of did you make a mistake or not. Right now, the 2 counties that are using the ranked choice voting with the software upgrade have precinct count configurations. And so basically that means that the voter at the polls feeds the ballot into a scanner right there at the polling place, and it will give them some immediate feedback as far as did you make a mistake? Did you mark too many choices? Did you mark not enough choices? And it'll allow the voter to fix the ballot before counting it. So we can absolutely, from a technological standpoint, run the voting system software upgrade on our current equipment, and to the extent that we don't need to use that upgrade, like the cumulative voting workaround and things, we can absolutely use that using our central count configuration. But the kind of the nuclear option, for the state would be to say that, they wanted us to be able to provide voters that instant feedback, and that we would have to go and try to do a precinct count configuration. That would be a extensive cost if we could even find the machines, because the machines are no longer being produced, and so it's a legacy system that's on its way out the door. So again, that's just a potential risk factor to consider. Let's see. That said, again, depending on the timeline for implementation, when we do upgrade to a new voting system, to the extent that it does natively support, these, from a technology standpoint, does natively support these voting methods, that would eliminate, a certain portion of the cost to the implementing jurisdiction for things like, single transferable vote or ranked choice voting. However, there would still, potentially be the costs associated with the increase. We're still talking about increased voter education, increased printing, and increased ballot layout and translation costs. So that is different voting methods in a nutshell. I'm happy at this point to open the floor up for questions.
Okay. So Keith?
Thank you. I think you answered two of my questions in your later comments. One question, I understand you're saying you can't coalesce in real time cumulative multiple appearing names.
Right.
Well, I went to the county's website on election night. I would just see 56 lines with each line's total, and I could add up the four and know essentially in real time, assuming I can add four numbers, who's where? Are you saying you just couldn't even show that many candidates?
No, so
Okay.
great. Yeah, that's a great question to clarify if I did not speak clearly. So we could absolutely display the full number of candidates. That's not a technological issue. The only issue is that it's not going to do that calculation for you. Yeah. But you could absolutely, as a viewing member of the public, see the four totals and add them yourself. Absolutely.
You said we were currently at seven? You said we were currently at 7 pages in the ballot, or 6 pages? And if
so-
we had enough candidates, we could push to 7, and 8 is the limit. What
Yeah.
would the county do if we kept our current system, and we had enough candidates together with Sunnyvale moving and someone else that it exceeded 8 pages?
So we would have to work with the state to get the certification for the
Okay,
approval.
but Santa
of the-
Clara's not going to know until August.
Right.
For a November election, and you are not going to have 6 to 18 months.
Right. So right now, I mean, it would basically be a situation where we would need to know, like, again, and we're really talking about, I just want to be clear, we're really talking about right now the cumulative voting workaround that's discussed and that you have the sample page of. Because that's at this point, that's what we can do given our current technology, but that would create a larger ballot. So I think what we would do is if we actually had a city that was going to implement that, we would make an assessment of the likelihood of other cities following suit. I mean, like I said, at this point, it's probably, if only the city of Santa Clara were conducting an election in that way, it would probably be less likely that that we would have to do that. But again, right, if as to your point, if we found out that the city of Sunnyvale was also considering that might be a case in which we initiate, the upgrade with the state, even not knowing how many candidates there are, just based off of the potential for it going to a second card. And we would probably, again, at that point, if we had 2 or 3 jurisdictions that were interested in doing this, we would probably do mock layouts of the ballots using the number of candidates and the number of candidates and options that they had in the past, similar to what we did with yours, and just see where that puts us in terms of the real estate. One other thing that came up. So we had a discussion about this. We have our Citizens Advisory Commission. So one thing that was pointed out to me that I will say is another way that we could potentially, or that the city could potentially mitigate that is in the number of contests that it has in the first election using this cumulative voting method, because we're really thinking that by the time that we get to 2020, we would have our new voting system, and so some of these considerations would go away. But for example, I know that you just had 4 in the last election. I think it was brought to my attention that you're going to have 2 next time. So that does, or is it 3? 3.
Move it
Sorry.
through.
So that would potentially.
But only 2 council seats.
Yeah, one
Only 2 council seats and 1 mayor.
Oh, yes, so 2 council seats. So, well, whichever it is, but I guess if it's less than 4, that does mitigate a certain amount of the risk, because again, if you look at your sample, you would have 1 less instance of each of those names. So, I mean, that would add up to being, 14 less positions that it would be, that would be taking up space, but it is potentially.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I maybe understood Keith's last question differently than the way you understood it.
Okay.
I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, the way he asked the question was, what if we go over 8 pages regardless of whether we went to cumulative or not? What happens?
I see.
Was that your question?
That was my question.
Okay.
Now, these are per precinct ballots, right? So the risk is any single precinct would go over 8 pages.
Yeah,
If most didn't, you're still, the moment any precinct goes over 8, you have to upgrade
right.
everything.
So at this point, in the absence of any, the size of the ballot has been steadily increasing, but it's been a little bit each election, but we haven't jumped. So I'll just to give you some context. The first election where we went to 3 cards was the 2010 general election. That was just barely on the first side of the 3rd card, so basically just barely onto 5 pages. And so it's taken us 7 years to kind of creep from barely onto 5 pages to taking up most of 6 pages. So, and because we're planning on having a new voting system that doesn't have this limitation of the 4-page or the 4 cards, the 8 pages by 2020, we're really just looking at 2018 as being the year of exposure for risk, and we're not seeing that organically it would grow. Right now we're just at the limit of 3 cards. We don't think it would grow an additional card over an additional card front and back just over the course of the next 2 years, basically. Because we're kind of already at, we are at the point where all of our cities are on the even number year. So it really is just a small number of other districts that could potentially join that.
Thank you. Was there any other questions?
One more question on that. I mean, from our perspective,
Yeah.
we don't care what Sunnyvale does,
Right.
right? Because no Sunnyvale office is going to appear on our ballot.
Oh, yes, good point. Yeah, good point. That's true.
So we would care what the state did,
The county?
the county, the number of propositions, are those also?
School board.
School
water-
board.
Yeah, right.
Water
So
district.
in terms of if another, so in the scenario that we're talking about, so that's a very good point. Thank you. So yeah, in the scenario that we're talking about where another district were to adopt this kind of style of voting, we'd be talking about, most likely a school board or something like that. Yeah.
Those were all the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jody, and then Brian.
Thank you. I wanted to just clarify a few things. So where it says there's an increase in printing costs, when you do an election, the candidate pays some money and the city pays some money. So is this increase in printing costs completely borne by the city, or is any of it borne by the each candidate?
So there are, that's a great question. So there are 2 different kinds of costs that were in the memo. I didn't go into the complete distinction. Mostly when I'm talking about printing costs, I'm talking about the cost to the city for printing the ballots and things like that. And really that's so for laying out and translating the ballots. We did also include some consideration, particularly for at-large and by-district elections. Sometimes what the discussion that comes up is the cost to candidates for placing a candidate statement, meaning the page in the sample ballot pamphlet, where they can say. So that really isn't as driven by the design of the ballot pages. In other words, if my name's going to appear 4 times as a candidate or just once, or if I can be marked 3 times versus 1 time, my candidate statement still looks the same. Just the point that we were making here is it's different if you're doing at large versus by district, and that when you're talking about at large, the candidate has to pay for essentially circulation through the entire jurisdiction, like the entire city, whereas jurisdictions that have gone to district type elections have seen that actually the cost to each individual candidate for their placing their statements in the pamphlet does go down, because they're only, like in the case of the city of San Jose, each candidate is only paying for circulation in 1/10 of the city. So there's still some setup costs and translation costs and everything that apply, but in terms of printing and postage and things like that, there are less copies of the book style with their statement in it. So therefore, there's less cost to the candidates.
Okay, and then the increase in cost if we go to one of these methods that nobody else is using, like if we needed the software upgrade, we would have to bear that entire cost as a city unless there were other jurisdictions also going to one of these. And do you know of any other jurisdictions that are also thinking about going to something that would require you to do the upgrade?
At this point, and I always hesitate to speak for another, government jurisdiction, but at this point, we're not aware of a city that's actively talking to us about adopting one of these methods. We have from time to time been asked to report on various different methods to the city of San Jose, but I'm not aware of right now, like any kind of, a concrete plan for adopting this over the next, say, 2 to 3 years.
Okay, and if it's not done in if nobody else does it in 2018, then would the next opportunity be 2020, and then at that point you're upgrading anyways?
So I want to just reiterate that there are certain costs that are technological costs where if we're just upgrading when we get to 2020 and we're upgrading our equipment anyways, then there's not necessarily going to be the technological costs associated with something like ranked choice voting or single transferable vote, where the system that we're already purchasing kind of natively supports this.
So there'd be no cost to the city if we waited until 2020?
But there would still potentially be some costs, again, associated with the printing that I was talking about and as with voter education.
Sure,
right?
but
the
wouldn't have the
technology
upgrade
costs, right?
cost. And if we did it sorry, okay, last one.
Yeah, go ahead.
If we did it in 2018 and others decided to join in as well because they heard that we're doing it, if for some reason they were able to move quickly, then we would share the cost of this upgrade?
Yeah, potentially. So some of the, some of the costs would, and, again, we would have to, if we got into the point that the city was really going to move forward with this, we would talk with the city about, okay, so, what portion of the costs are going to the city, what portion of the costs are something that the county would absorb versus what a portion of the costs, and if there were multiple jurisdictions, how we would split that up. But I would say generally our practice has been, if there's costs that we're incurring in conducting an election on behalf of a city, that's usually the type of thing that we would charge back to a city. And I would say that in general, to the extent that we have costs like that are that could be shared, amongst multiple jurisdictions, we would apportion it that way. But again, at this point, I couldn't necessarily say we would apportion it on the basis of a split 50-50, even, or whether we would look at, the relative size of the jurisdiction or anything. We just haven't really had those conversations at the county level yet.
But the 2020 upgrade you're paying for?
The 2020 upgrade, yes, at this point, right. Well, yeah, if you're a taxpayer in Santa Clara County, you're paying for it. But no, yeah, it's earmarked with it's earmarked with county general fund funding, and then there's a potential for it to get reimbursement through state grant money as well. So.
Thank you. Anything else, Jody?
Not for now.
Okay. Brian?
I'm just going to ask a few just
Yeah.
practical questions.
Sure.
Our timeline for looking at this is we would have a ballot measure on, for whatever change we're going to make, if we recommend a change. It would be on the June ballot, the June 2018 ballot. So we would not know for sure which system we would be adopting until June 2018. In other words, so the question would be, and then the new system would be expected to go into effect November 2018.
Yeah.
So given that timeline, are there, from a practical standpoint, which of these voting methods could you actually implement if we were to change
Yeah.
our voting method between June 2018 in time for the November 2018 ballot?
Okay, so according to that time frame, I would say because for ranked choice voting, we would absolutely have to go to the state and get that upgrade for our voting system to be able to do that. We're not aware of a workaround that would work with that. So that would be really, I mean, we would have to be starting now to make sure that we got approval by the state in time for that, and that would be kind of cutting it close. I would say that was, yes, aggressive, and I think that's a good time frame. And again, it's only because, and it's not out of wanting to be obstructionist or limiting the options. It's just it's very difficult to get it's very difficult to get an estimated timeline for this kind of thing from the state. And every time that we do get an estimated timeline, I would say, as a safe rule of thumb, adds 3 to 6 months to that, conservatively. So that's, I mean, I think like the best case scenario is that we would get approval for something like that in 6 months. I think easily the worst case scenario, especially if they have a lot of concerns about our equipment, it could easily go to a year and a half, just to get the approval from the state. So that said, that's to a certain degree knocks out ranked choice voting. I also, I don't believe that single transferable vote, even with the upgrade, would be natively supported. So, limited voting, as I said, that's still on the table because we can do that with no technology upgrade. At large and district obviously are currently done right now. And then this cumulative voting workaround method, because it doesn't necessarily require a change in our technology, that would theoretically be something that within this time frame could be done.
Okay, so to summarize, so the four that you could do would be at-large, district,
Cumulative with the workaround.
cumulative with the multiple card, and the cumulative workaround would be all those names,
Example that-
the names
yeah.
repeated, and then limited. And repeat again what limited
The
is?
limited is just, it would be like the same thing as an at-large, where you have all of all voters get the full slate of candidates for all the 3 seats or 4 seats or however many are open, but you just select one or less than.
But they wouldn't be numbered seats, right? I mean, they wouldn't.
Right, no, not
No,
necessarily.
It'd be a true at-large system.
Yeah, yes, for the most part.
Because it wouldn't make sense to only have one vote if there's 3 numbered seats, right?
Right. I mean, there's different configurations, but I would say that the standard way of doing it would be, right, if you've got 3 open seats, just for example, you would have all the candidates who are running listed together as if it was like an at-large, but the voters would pick one per voter, and then.
And does anyone use that in California, to your knowledge?
I'm not aware of it being used in California. So in fact, out of all of these that we're talking about, the only one that I'm aware of being used regularly in California is ranked choice voting, except for just the standard at-large and by district. These other forms are in use, I know of, in other jurisdictions, like in the country or in other countries, but I'm not aware of them being used in California currently.
Real quick, Teresa, do you have a question to follow on to that?
Yeah, it's a follow-on to what Brian says.
Yeah.
So as a committee, what we could do is make a recommendation for the 2018 election about changing to districts, and then have another follow-on recommendation that would go in November of 2018 to be put in place for the 2020, and we could separate them out into two distinct things, and that would free up the time frame, and we wouldn't be constrained by economics or logistics in making the recommendation that felt like the right recommendation to us. Is that correct?
And that's if we were to choose to do something other than the at-large by district or limited.
Right.
Right.
But we could stagger the recommendation, one going out in.
So I guess I would turn to your city attorney to really answer that, other than to say, as a logistical thing, I mean, we could in some configurations do one thing for, 2018 and do another thing in 2020.
No, what my suggestion is
Okay.
wait and do changing the voting methodology, put that onto the ballot at the end of 2018, so there aren't constraints on it. And it would flow into the new system that's already being purchased, and make the other recommendation for the summer of 2018, the June election.
That just gives me another question. I mean, I know you're planning on going to a new system by 2020 that would have advanced capabilities. However, are you sure that we could actually use it? It would be usable by 2020 if we were to choose one of these other voting methods that we theoretically think it could handle?
Yeah. So the current plan for our implementation is for beginning it in the fall of 2019. It's like in other words, we would use the new technology for the first time in the fall of 2019 during the off-year local consolidated elections. So based off of that time frame, then yes, I mean, the capabilities would be available in 2020.
Just to respond to your question, you wouldn't necessarily have to wait until the November 2018 ballot to put another ballot measure on for the 2020 change. You could put it directly in the ballot measure. In other words, you could have two ballot measures on in June of 2018.
Right.
One of which would go into effect in November of 2018, and another that would go into effect in November 2020.
Okay, thank you. So we have a number of folks. I'm going to go to Hussam, then Saskia, and then Rod had a question, and then I'll go back to Keith.
Just to tag on to Brian, your last comment where you said we could put them both on this 2018. Couldn't it just be one ballot measure where you say, instead of splitting, say we're going to go to districts, and then by 2020 it will be districts by, let's say, cumulative or rank choice or whatever? I mean, could you lump them into one ballot? I mean, I know that's maybe not a question to the registrar, but that was just a follow-on to your statement.
I know there's certain restrictions on how complex a ballot measure can be, but I think you'd also have to consider how likely would the ballot measure be to pass if you made it too complex. And so you might want to keep them as separate ballot measures so that you're not killing one concept by overcomplicating it with another.
Okay. I have questions for you gentlemen. Yeah, they know that. They know that already. I introduced them at the beginning of the meeting. So I actually understand limited voting to be a little bit different than what you explained, and so then I'm going to explain what I understand it to be, and then just tell me if yes or no the system can do it, which is, let's say there are 3 open seats. If for limited voting, it's just one list of names. It's not names repeated 3 times, but just one list of names, and I pick candidate A, B, and C. I give a third of my vote power to A, a third to B, and a third to C. Or if I just pick 2 of them, I give half of my voting power to A and half of it to B. Or if I just picked 1, I gave all of my voting power to A. Can the system handle that? Because the way you explained it, you only get 1 vote, and that's it. But I could fill in as many bubbles as I wanted, and if I filled in 10 bubbles, then 10% of my vote goes to each person that I filled in the bubble for.
Yeah, and again, this is why I prefaced it with, we're talking about methods that are, used in different ways in different jurisdictions, and those jurisdictions are not Santa Clara County, so there are different varieties of it. So I'm not really familiar with that version of it. However, just off the cuff, I would say that would be difficult for our system to handle, most likely, just because, again, you're weighting the vote differently depending on, it's not just like, for example, the cumulative voting thing where a voter marks it, marks one choice, and if they mark it once, it equals 1 vote, and if they mark it twice, it equals 2 votes. What you're describing actually seems almost like a variant of cumulative voting, where it's the system would have to rank or weight the choices automatically for the voter rather than having them marked multiple times. So it doesn't sound like it's the type of thing that our system could do right now, unless there was a workaround that somebody knew of. I would say not, for sure not with this current voting system. I'm actually not even sure that the new voting system in that format, we'd have to research it more to know whether the new voting system would be able to handle that.
I'm getting conflicting message from the audience, but well, it's a question. It's particular to this question though, because if as he's saying it can't be done, then it's an eliminated. We can't do it. But if there's a clarification from the audience,
I'm okay if it's a question from the audience or a quick clarification, but I don't want to go to public comment yet. We have too many folks on this panel that still have questions. So if you can do it in 1 minute or less, that'd be great.
Here you go.
Okay, Hussam is describing a system called even and equal cumulative voting. It's used in Peoria, Illinois, but it's not part of the scope of work that we've been considering for Santa Clara County.
okay, so it can't be done with their system. Okay.
The current equipment cannot do that, no.
All right, going on to my next question. Thank you. Thank you for keeping it brief.
Thank you.
I don't understand how, in your column here, cost factors, ranked choice, and single transferable vote increase in printing costs. I can understand the increase in printing costs with cumulative because you potentially expand the number of pages because you repeat the name multiple times. But in ranked choice and single transferable vote, how are we increasing in printing costs?
So the reason for that is that you need to present multiple voting targets for each candidate to the voter. In other words, so right now, and again, the second of the 2 pages that we give you kind of gives you a sense of this. So in this example, which is not an example from our county, the contest. So if it were just a single, vote for 1 or a vote for 3 contest, you would only have 1 instance of the candidates' names appearing. So in other words, if you just mentally cover up the second and third columns and just look at that first column, that's what it looks like, right? But in order to allow the voter to say, okay, I want to mark candidate A as my first choice, candidate B as my second choice, and candidate C as my third choice, you need to have 3 instances of that. Now, and then even on the, there are other, the 3 is the limitation of the.
What does 3 instances mean?
In other words, you have to print the names 3 times. Just like, there's 3 columns, each column is the same set of candidates,
so a question
repeated,
then.
right? Yeah, 'cause
So a
you-
question then on that is that this is just a mechanism of how the system tabulates, right? So so then you're saying that in this scenario, or in the way that you have printed here, that I can only give 3 ranks? I can't give as many ranks as there are candidates?
So that's correct for the software version for the current system that we have now,
yeah.
that for the Sequoia system we have now. Depending on which system we end up upgrading to, that limitation of 3 will increase when we get our new voting system in 2020. It doesn't, I don't remember offhand what the new numbers are, but it doesn't necessarily go away completely. They have.
The limits, the number of
Right.
ranks you can, a voter can vote
Right.
for.
So it's more than 3. I want to say it's at least 6 to 9.
So the current system, the one that Alameda and San Francisco use, maximum 3 ranks,
Yes.
and that was it. And then in the next one, it may be more than 3, but it won't be as, potentially as many candidates as are running. So if you have 20 candidates running, it doesn't go from 1 to 20.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
I think I have one more question. This is maybe a more of a comment, or it could be a question, I guess. It's considering in 2018, it's not a presidential election. Historically speaking, have there been more items on the ballot than in a presidential election? Because again, when we talk about exceeding 8 pages, we're only really looking at 2018 because by 2020 you'll be on the new system anyways. So in 2018, even if you went to cumulative voting and you ended up with, extra pages because you had to repeat the name multiple times, but the rest of the ballot had fewer issues on it because it's a non-presidential. Is that what you would see in historically speaking, or no?
Historically speaking, no. And again, this may change soon because we're getting very close to the point where we're going to somewhat plateau because we're going to run out of jurisdictions that are jumping ship from the odd number year to the even number year. But basically, the trajectory that we've been seeing over the last, I would say, 7 years is, or even longer than that. Like I would say 2010 had more contests than 2008, 12 had more than 10, 14 had more than 12, 16 had more than 14. So it's kind of regardless of the, now I will say in all cases, the general always has more than the primary, then that's absolutely for certain. But the presidential versus non-presidential, it affects turnout, but it doesn't necessarily affect the size of the ballot or the number of contests.
That's it, Tino.
Is that it? Okay, sounds good.
For now.
My questions really relate to, well, I'm going to start with, so there is a bigger cost if people don't vote, is my opinion. That's just my opinion. And how long does the voter outreach take? What's your estimate on that? And what type of voter education do you do? And how much is on our part? Where's that dividing line?
Well, I'll answer the easiest part of that question, which is the last one first. And so I guess in terms of what's the dividing line between like what does the county do versus what does the city do? I think that would just be something that, again, were we to implement one of these things, we would have a conversation with the city in terms of, what resources does the city have? What does it make sense for the city to do themselves versus what does it make sense for us to do? For example, because, we're training our staff anyways on, how the ballots are laid out, how the ballots are counted and everything like that, it probably makes more sense for our staff to be the ones that are going out to festivals and community meetings and things like that to do like in-person demonstrations. But it may be that the city, for example, wants to take it upon itself to do a direct mailer to their voters, saying, with a pamphlet or a half sheet or a one sheet, saying this is what your ballot's going to look like. This is what the decision that was made, and this is how it's different. So that's kind of the long story short is it depends, and it would have to be worked out with the city. I mean, absolutely, if the city said, we don't have the resources or to do anything at all, and we just want the county to just run the whole show then we could do that, but more than likely a city would want to be partners. I mean, that's what happened with Alameda County and the city of Oakland, is that Alameda County did certain activities and then Oakland supplemented that. So that's the first answer. Sorry. Timeline, yeah. So that's a good question. I would say if we knew, say, coming out of a June election that we were going to be conducting the November election in a certain way, that would be probably that would be the shortest timeline. I would suggest it would be nicer to have more time than that. I mean, there is a certain factor that we've seen, is that starting voter education campaigns like far in advance of an election, there's a point where you reach diminishing returns where voters just are, if you're talking to a voter, in 2017 about an election that's going to happen in fall of 2018, you get less response, less bang for your buck. But to the extent that one of the things that we find that holds true, and they'll say this is the kind of the first rule of advertising, is that repetition sticks. And so I would say that would be pretty tight. And again, it would be something where we would probably want to. It would be something that we would want to, again, if knowing that this is on the ballot in June, potentially to affect November, we'd probably want to have a discussion with the city, or even in advance of that, of setting up certain things to come into place, should that happen. And I'll let Philip jump in, because he actually is in charge of our voter education and public relations and marketing, so he can speak to this.
Thank you. So first, I love it when Matt, the assistant registrar, comes, because I get to sit here and not say much. But I've been chomping at the bit and sitting on my hands. My primary concern would be, I'm the manager of public and legislative affairs. So my primary concern is the voter education component and the public education and outreach components. I can tell you not that City of Santa Clara and Santa Clara County would do the same, but the City of Oakland started in February for their implementation in November. And they had events basically, according to their calendar, almost daily from that until the election. The other thing I want to talk about, because we haven't talked a lot about here, when we're talking about printing costs, I want to make sure we're talking about things, not just the ballot printing, that we're talking about the sample ballot, the voter information guide that every voter gets in the mail. Well, obviously, the City of Santa Clara's version would be different than the version for the rest of the county. There would be different ballot instructions and different, we call filler pages, which are the instructional pages of how to complete the ballot. So that is something I do want to mention. I also want to mention that implementation in Alameda County consisted of English, Spanish, and Chinese. And Matt did a good job outlining our languages, but we would need to add Vietnamese and Tagalog for our federal voting rights languages, and then we would need to add Japanese, Korean, Hindi, and Khmer for our state voting rights languages. So I would want to make sure that we were working with the city and the Secretary of State's office to be producing voter education and outreach in all 9 of those languages. The one thing I need to check is Khmer only really affects 2 precincts in the county, and I'm not sure if they're within the City of Santa Clara, so you may get away with 8 instead of 9 languages. Part of the of my duty is I'm the liaison between Santa Clara County and the Secretary of State's office. So I would be the one working with the city, representing the city in the county at Voting Systems Panel in Sacramento, representing you before the Voting Certification and Office of Voting Technology, who I have had the opportunity to speak with briefly on 3 occasions in regards to the city of Santa Clara. And I can tell you that they roughly, the timelines that Matt outlined, the 6 to 18 months, are really their timelines. They really don't know. So we've talked briefly with them about the things you're interested in, but they really can't look at it and begin that process until they have some more concrete things. And those concrete things would be an administrative approval document, use procedures, which are generally very thick, use procedures, the implementation plan, which is something that we would need to work closely with the city on, and then the most important for me would be the voter outreach and education plan. And so I'm going to keep hitting that voter outreach and education plan because that is where I think I call them implementing jurisdictions. That's what I call the 3 cities in Alameda County who shared the cost. And it was a little over $1 million for those 3 jurisdictions. And then the city and county of San Francisco obviously was one jurisdiction. They didn't have anyone to share the costs with. When the city of Oakland put additional funds into the voter education and outreach, they did so using community-based organizations, and they awarded those grants to CBOs in the amount of $100,000. When the city and county of San Francisco, which it would be significantly higher today, at least I would hope it would be significantly higher because they implemented some time ago. They did 10 grants of $30,000 apiece, so they did $300,000 in their voter education. It sounds like a lot. Those costs do come down. There are ongoing education costs, but they do come down after the first use. But I am worried about those languages. I do want to make sure that we're considering all 8 or 9 of those languages. The other thing that Alameda County did fairly successfully is they created a new poll worker training program. And what they did is and I would recommend this if you're considering changing not just to ranked choice voting, but anything different than people are used to on their ballot, is they created a new election officer position, and that was the ranked choice voting officer. And so they sat there, and while voters came in, explained the difference that they were going to see on their ballot. If voters had questions, they explained those differences. And that, I'm going to go back to those 9 languages again. We're going to want to make sure that in polling places in the city of Santa Clara that we have election officers who speak your targeted languages to explain those things. And that's going to be an upfront thing, but I don't, for the most part, jurisdictions and cities don't consider cost when we're talking about voter education and implementing changes in elections technology. If you have specific questions in regards to voter education and outreach, that's really what I'm going to hit you on.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to Rod, and then we're going to go back to Keith. And was there anybody else? You got an answer, so we'll go to Rod.
First, let me share with you guys a little bit about the City of Santa Clara's voter and community outreach programs. If you were on the committee last time I outreached to you, you came in and you had a review with me with regards to our city's current very extensive state, national, and international award-winning voter and community outreach programs. The city spends on an average election cycle in kind of the mid-5 figures with regards to just outreaching to voters in Santa Clara, the city of Santa Clara, to get folks more savvy with regards to how to research candidates based on their own personal ideology. In this case, I would expect the clerk's office at least, and certainly in partnership with the public communications manager, to request something in the low to mid 6 figures that would allow us to do a similar type of voter education in the city of Santa Clara if we were changing to something that was a voting system that was not overly familiar to folks. So if we went to district elections, because the voter interface is the same when the voter walks into the ballot, we would likely have a similar voter education to what we have now, perhaps a little bit higher to explain why they're only voting on 1 seat instead of multiple seats. However, if we were to go to one of the more esoteric voting systems that are more difficult for the voter on the base level to interface with and understand what to do, we would have a significantly higher level of voter education On the city side, we would then want to talk with the registrar's office to understand what their needs were on the ROV side, which would serve to some extent different purposes in that, theirs is going to be both kind of context and also legal driven to make sure that they've done their due diligence as the registrar's office. And I will outreach to anybody on the committee who did not do that review during the last cycle to see if you want to come into the clerk's office and do just a general review about what those programs look like, so you have that as context for the discussion here. The question that I had was for Philip with regards to your department, and let me see if this is the right place to ask this. And I've got a series of questions, Mr. Chair, if that's okay. We know you have 30 days with regards to responding, coming up with a final canvas for consideration by the city council, the consolidation of the election, them accepting your certified results. If we did go to cumulative voting under this system where we had multiple folks listed and you've got to go through and do the hand tally similar to the way you now tally write-in candidates, other things like that, would that put that 30-day time window in jeopardy? No?
I don't see any changes in state law allowing us to go beyond that 30 days, and I don't see anything that would stop us from being able to certify the election within the 30-day window.
Okay, good. The next is whether or not, from either of your points of view, so far you've been speaking, legally, technologically, your skill sets with regards to your actual professional, what is you're mandated to do. My question is whether or not either of you see things anecdotally with regards to changing election systems, or what you've seen in your profession and stories from other municipalities that have done so, that we should consider, not just with regards to kind of the nuts and bolts and how they fit together. So if there are anecdotal stories or things like that that we should look into as a committee, or they should look into as a committee.
Do you want to
Go ahead.
Okay.
You go first, give me a second.
Yeah. It's an interesting question, and I would say, well, I'll say this. First off, anytime you change things, I can say unequivocally with our combined experience working in elections. Anytime you change things on voters, it creates confusion. I mean, we have been using our current style of ballot for 14 years now, and voters are still making mistakes. Like, we're still on the tail of the voter education. I mean, so if you think of like the mistake started off here, and then you've got like the long tail. So I would say that any change is absolutely gonna create a need for voter education and potentially confuse voters. That said, some changes are necessary and some changes are good. For example, when we change voting systems in 2020, 2019 to 2020, we're going to have to retrain voters. We feel that there's enough benefit, though, to voters to have a better system, a more transparent system, better technology, a better kind of user interface. That there are benefits that outweigh that. So, as to the question of any of these systems, like as to does the benefits outweigh the costs? I would just, I don't know that we really could say that anyone that anyone does or does not. I would say that there are plenty of news articles and case studies and different things like that out there in the various jurisdictions that do use that committee members should feel free to Google. I mean, I would say looking at San Francisco and Alameda as our most immediate neighbors, you can see the different issues and opinions that exist there. And I think it's just one of those things where we as a government agency and not elected officials and not politicians ourselves and not, a political entity, kind of we get the easy side of the job as far as just kind of washing our hands and saying, we don't advise on the politics or the policy side of things as far as, does this benefit outweigh the costs, or does this, does this help more people than it hurts, or things like that? We kind of leave that, at the county level at least, we leave that up to the board. Do you have anything more specific you wanted to add?
So that's what I would say. I wouldn't be doing my job if I started telling you in this jurisdiction they say X and this one they say Y. I kind of have to leave my personal opinion out of it. I will tell you that there are a number of academic studies, as Matt mentions. If you just type in instant runoff voting or ranked choice voting implementation, there are hundreds of studies that have been done. There were studies specifically done in Alameda County and City and County of San Francisco, but there are other larger studies around the country that have tracked from implementation through several election cycles, pro and con. So that information is out there. The one personal note I want to mention, though, is I was hired 15 years ago to come into the Registrar of Voters office, and I was the one that was tasked on my first day with creating a training program for implementation of the current voting system that we're using. So when Matt talks about implementing a new voting system and change in voters, I can recall those first election cycles where optical scan ballots were coming back, and instead of people filling out the line, they were using scissors and X-Acto knives to cut out the voting target. I mean, there's things like that, and so that's where in both my previous position and my current position, I am going to say the exact same thing I said before. In large part, this is going to depend on the voter outreach and education plan that's developed jointly with the city and submitted to the Secretary of State for any change, and the outreach efforts that are done. It all is going to come down to voter education and outreach.
And then, my final question was with regards to the poll workers that you said would be at each of the City of Santa Clara polls to help people guide their way through the new process. Is that something that the registrar's office paid for, or is that something that the municipality would pay for?
Yeah, it would be something that would be billed back to the city. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I want to remind the group that we have a half an hour left. So we, not that I don't want us to ask questions, but I want us to be mindful that we're going to come upon that 9 o'clock, and we still haven't had a discussion amongst ourselves. And so as we get closer, I'll remind the group, if you guys want to make a motion to go longer, that's fine. But I want to make sure that everyone knows we basically have less than a half an hour left. So I didn't see the sequence of hands. I know Hassam, and then I saw Jody, and then Teresa. Okay, so we'll go Hassam, Jody, Teresa.
First is not a question. For those who are wondering, there's 5 minutes left in the game, and the Warriors are up 118 to 106. Okay. Now to my question.
So do we have a second to adjourn?
Okay, my question is, on the issue of changing the system to upgrade it for 2018, not for 2020, which will already happen, but this is with ranked choice that needs approval from the state. Is this something that and you said it takes a long time to get that approval. Is that something that you have to wait until, if and until we as a city decide to go there, or is there a path to getting pre-approval? So you hearing from us now that we may be considering it can trigger a process for you to get pre-approval so that in June, if it's on the ballot and it gets approved, you're ready to go for November. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so that would be a conversation that we would have with the city if that was direction we were getting from the city. The issue is that, again, there may be costs associated with that, and the cost would likely be something that we would build back to the city. So,
You mean to get pre-approval?
Yeah, I mean, and so I guess we would have to, I mean, again, we do not have like currently a roadmap or implementation plan for implementing one of these, options. So if we got direction from the city that it was looking as if we were leaning in one direction or another, we could have a conversation that was, okay, what would the timelines look like? What would the implementation plan look like? Is there any portion of this that we strategically want to start working on, in advance of the election, and we're okay with incurring costs, what portions of it could potentially wait until after the election and still have enough time to still have enough time to implement between those two elections.
And if you were to incur some costs in anticipation of a pre-approval, what kind of order of magnitude are we talking about? Like thousands of dollars, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands?
Again, it really is dependent, and I understand as I'm saying it that it's not the most satisfying answer, but it largely is going to depend on again, the nature of requirements that the state may put on us. Again, if for example, there were requirements that in order to accomplish them in time for the election, that we might have to start either ordering equipment or something of that nature in order to get that ready for a November, to get that ordered, paid for, tested, shipped, and everything in time for deployment in the November election. Like that equipment order would likely have to be placed before the June election took place.
So it would still be a majority of the cost would be incurred before we actually knew whether we were going there or not?
Potentially. I mean, again, like I said, I understand it's frustrating to keep getting the answer. It depends, but it really does depend. I mean, in other words, if the state, looked at our implementation plan and said, we feel that you've got this covered and without any major modifications to, your facility, your equipment, your anything, we're going to give you just the go ahead right away. That is certainly a possibility, and so I don't want to say that that's not, but more likely than not, they're going to fall somewhere on that spectrum between A-OK and you have to completely overhaul everything. We just don't know where on that spectrum we're going to fall.
Okay. Another question? Okay. Let's go to Jody.
Still trying to figure out what we can do and not do. You made a comment that if we do the software upgrade in 2018, you're going to have to go to a method of having the electronics at each polling place. But then you made the comment that there may not be enough of these machines. So, so what does that mean? Does that mean that you have to at some point go out and look, and if you can't find them, then we have to scrap the whole thing?
So again, that's a potential risk that would exist. Now, the other thing is, I just want to say, I want to make sure I'm clear. I'm not saying that we would absolutely have to get new equipment. I'm just saying that is something, when you look at us right now in our county and what we look like, and when you look at the two counties that the state did approve for this, that's the major difference, right? So, but I just want to be clear, it's not a technological, logistical need, like we could theoretically do it without. It's just something that the state may place upon us as an administrative requirement. So that said, yes, absolutely. I mean, again, and I do want to emphasize, what we said before, that any scenario in which we are needing to go through this software upgrade, even if we were to say tonight we were going to start working on this for the November election, we would be taking on a certain amount of risk that it would not be accomplished in that time frame. That's That's the outside, timeframe is 6 to 18 months. And so 18 months from now, we really are talking about the end of calendar year 2018, right?
But what happens in November of 18 if our city has said, we want to do something and you can't implement it? Then what happens?
That's a very good question that's a very good question that we would have to look at. I mean, it would be something where we would have to, again, once we know what direction the city's going in, we would have to really sit down and look at an implementation plan, make an assessment of what the risks are, and, again, just make an assessment of how likely is this to happen, and is there some kind of alternative that we need to get put into place in order to just get us through the next year's election. And at this point, I couldn't really tell you like what that could be. I mean, just because it could be far-reaching. I mean, as far as what that would need to look like.
Thank you.
To our attorney, do you have a comment about that? If the city says, we vote on something to say, okay, we're going to switch to this, and then they can't implement it, what does that mean? And how does that affect the lawsuit?
I don't think the city council would put such a thing on the ballot regardless of what you recommended. I mean, if in their judgment, if you recommend something that in their judgment is not likely to be able to be accomplished, they're not going to put it on the ballot. No one's going to write in a ballot measure, a recommendation or a supporting ballot measure argument, because if we can't have that election, what's the point in asking the voters to put that on the ballot?
Thank you. Teresa?
Yeah, I had a question about voter outreach and support and stuff. So if we were to do something that was really new and you did a variety of, say, YouTube videos demonstrating, answering questions, and you had access in the variety of languages at each of the polling places, does that meet the needs of educating all the people that might come into that polling station and having those videos available with links in material? Because I'm just thinking of the cost. I mean, these costs could be...
So I will say in other jurisdictions, they have utilized social media, YouTube videos, they have utilized flash videos and things on social media. They've used, Alameda County did some, a lot of web stuff that they did there. But I will tell you, the state's requirement is going to be that you're doing outreach and voter education to all of the voters. So they're going to look less of an issue in Silicon Valley, but they're going to look at digital divide. They're going to say a lot of this has to be done. Alameda County, I think, did a mailer. They did 900,000 pieces of mail for the 3 cities, so it would obviously be smaller. They will likely say that there needs to be more than one point of contact. So they're going to say that you need to reach each voter likely 2 or 3 times. So there are some things there, but they generally wouldn't allow it to all be online.
Thank you. All right. And then Hassan has a quick
This is a
question.
really brief question, and the question is from somebody online who's asking, is there a likelihood for some sort of like a hand counting the ballots in 2018 until 2020 comes online? So like, let's say we still decide as a committee that we really, really like one of these alternative methods. I know this sounds a little crazy, but to hand count in 2018 until the new system comes online in 2020.
So the question that was asked earlier as to like, would some of these methods risk our ability to certify in 30 days? I'd say you found the one of all of the options that's going to do that. Yeah, and I would just say in general, like we have a lot of experience with hand counts. They generally are, not as accurate, and they do introduce a lot of opportunity for human error into the process that you have to spend a lot of time and energy and effort in mitigating that human error. Yeah.
The answer is you probably wouldn't recommend that.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Beverly?
A real quick question for Brian. If we were to go to an alternative kind of voting method and we weren't sure we could put it on the, or run it through the registrar's office, could we put on a ballot measure something to the effect of as soon as administratively possible that it can be adopted?
I mean, theoretically, you can write anything you want in a charter, but the question is what does that do in terms of the likelihood of the ballot measure passing? So, it's all a question of judgment. If you want something to actually pass, it has to be understandable and simple enough for people to vote yes or no on. And something like, as soon as administratively possible, I think would lessen the chances of it happening. I would be really reluctant. I wouldn't even know how to write such a thing. I certainly wouldn't recommend doing it that way. I mean, I would say, do what based upon the information you have tonight, make an informed judgment. I'm not saying you have to make the judgment tonight, but using the information you have about the practical ability to do it, that's how you do the timing. In other words, we've heard tonight that there are certain things that for sure you can implement in the 2018 November election, and then you have reasonable certainty that you could probably implement certain alternatives in 2020. You're free to recommend however you like it. You could time it to be absolutely sure. You might say by 2022, do this other thing, or you could just put as someone over here suggested, just leave it to a future commission or council to recommend an additional change down the line when it becomes more practical.
For the record, the Warriors won. So as we were sitting here debating voting methods, the Warriors beat the Cavaliers, so thank God for that. Now we can sleep easier tonight.
I'd like to make a motion to extend the meeting.
Okay, is there a second? How long would you like to?
How long would people like to? 9:30? I'd like to make a motion to extend the meeting to 9:30.
Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thanks. Okay, are there any other questions? I want to make sure, I know we're going into some minutia and we're kind of going into a little bit more detail, and that's okay, but I want to make sure that everybody has their questions answered because the next phase of this is discussion on what to do. So if you have any questions that you are still kind of curious or whatever the case is, whether you spoke 5 times or 1 time or no times at all, while we have these guys here, let's make sure that you walk out of here feeling like you understand all the variables that go into all the different types of methodology. So I'm going to go to Hussam because he's looking at me like he might have one more question.
Questions for the 10th time. Somebody's asking online if Alameda can count for us our ballots. I don't know if I support that, but it's a legitimate question.
Well, San Francisco
Could Alameda County?
So I don't see why not.
Yeah, I think that would be, that's more of a legal question that we wouldn't answer. Yeah, thanks.
Right. Okay. So what I'm hearing, and to sum this up, and I think, to Brian's point, I think when I look at this practically, there are so many what-if variables that I want to make sure that we walk away with. Can we do this? Maybe. Can we do that? Maybe. Well, it's up to the state. It's up to an implementation period of 6 to 18 months, and we can't give you, an assurance of what that might look like. And there's educational costs, but we don't know, and we don't know who's going to share the burden, and so on and so forth. And so what I'm hearing, and the reason I'm bringing this forth is just that when we make the recommendation to council, I do agree with Brian that we want to give them something that's practical, because I believe if the council goes, well, and we're presenting, or I'm presenting, and they ask all the unknown variables of why are you making this recommendation? Do you know for a fact that we can do this? You talk to, the county register of voters, and my answer is, well, we're not sure, we're not sure, we're not sure. I don't know that that would be something that we would want to present to the council. And I'm not saying we should not look at alternative ways. I'm not trying to sway anybody, but I want to bring the voice of practicality back, because we had some great discussion and we got into the nuts and bolts of a lot of stuff here. But what I'm hearing time and time again, not that it's anything you can magically do about it, but if I were presented with all of these unknowns, I would probably look across at the person presenting and say, then why are you here? You're not giving us anything that we can truly work with, because if we put this out there, we don't even know there's even costs incurred, and we don't even have a vote yet if people actually are going to agree with it or not, and there's equipment to be bought and so on and so forth. So I just want people to factor in the practical part when we look at this, and that's not to say that you have to have a certain opinion, but when we debate this, try to keep the practicality in front of us. The other thing that I think makes sense is the 2020 or the 2022 election. And I don't think that there's been a mindset of kind of like we have to rush. We have to rush to fix. Well, from a lawsuit perspective, it's districting. That's one piece, as Teresa said. The other piece is the how are we going to elect going forward. And I don't think we have to run a sprint. I think you can run sort of a marathon and get to where we need to be, because it's not like we're going to have 5 elections and that's it for all of time. We're going to every 2 years have elections. So to rush to try and get something that has to be done in 2018 or has to be done in 2020, I would say be cautious, because what we want is a long-term solution. We don't want to cause chaos for the simple fact of putting the cart before the horse. And so again, that's not to persuade anybody to think a certain way, but as we think about what we are going to collectively present to council, I think it needs to be a solution that, 1, is practical, and 2, is practical. It's practical for the city, and it's practical for the execution of. And so that's just kind of my summary of everybody's comments, and I think your questions were great. I think hopefully we have a lot of information that we can now use to discuss next steps. Is there any other questions, Steve and Teresa? Does anybody else have a question that right now you're not sure about any of the information presented today, or any of the information we've talked about in previous meetings that's lingering that perhaps Philip and Matt might be able to answer for us? Because I want us walking away from here, I want everybody feeling like I have what I need to contribute to the discussion. So let's go to Steve, Teresa, and then Saskia.
Thank you. And this kind of goes to item 5 on your agenda, but I wanted to ask it while our experts were still in the room to make sure that I saw it correctly. And that is, looking at our notes, our charge is to choose an election method that represents all of Santa Clara and to resolve the CVRA lawsuit. So as I'm hearing the different voting methods, at large is something you guys can handle, but it doesn't resolve our lawsuit. By district accomplishes both of those tasks. Ranked choice voting is probably not going to be available in 2018. Cumulative voting may be an option. Single transferable vote is probably not an option for 2018. And limited voting, although maybe problematic, is a possibility. So of all those different voting methods, we're really down to 2, maybe 3 options. And does it make sense to just say, okay, let's clear the decks. These are the only 3 we're going to talk about because they're the ones that resolve our charge.
And to your point, I think that's very practical thinking. To the other point of we don't have to run a marathon, we don't have to run a sprint, we can run a marathon. So if we were chartered with fixing it right now, then Steve, I would 100% agree with you that we could pretty much through deductive reasoning, like you've done perfectly, we could figure out that these are our options. But the question to the committee is there something that's so compelling that makes you really want to explore some of the other methods, even though they may not be able to be implemented until 2020 or 2022? So, to your point, you're dead on. To the fact that they want us to fix it, but they didn't say, I don't think they said fix it by 2018. We may extend it to 2020, right? They want it fixed by 2018? So if that's what they want, then we are very limited. But if this group comes back and says, you want it done by 2018, but it's still a recommendation. Okay, it's a recommendation that we're going to give to them, and they're going to have to mull over, and they're going to have to decide if it's something that they want to do or they don't want to do. So, I mean, I understand what Brian's saying, and attorneys want to, I know Brian wants to shut the door on this, and I get it, I don't blame him, I would too. But, by the same token, we have to collectively agree. And if we have 7 people that say, it can't be done the right way in 2018, then then we have to have further discussion, right? So when you say you have to fix it by 2018, I almost look at it as we are fixing it, but we're not giving it to you in 2018. Your fix will come in due time, but it may not be in 2018. Your fix may come in 2020, but we're still offering a fix.
I respectfully disagree in that the last Charter Review Committee was characterized as kicking the can, down the road because we didn't make a decision or a recommendation. And if this committee recommends something in 2020, 2022, that's a pretty good kick. I think the council wants a resolution to maybe get a more representative council. And to resolve the lawsuit, because that, we'll be paying money on that lawsuit long before 2020, is my impression.
Right. And again, that's an argument when we start to deliberate and start talking about this. That's why there's 12 or 13 people here, because each person has their opinion. And like I said, your point is well taken. I would love to come with a concrete solution that says, here's how we fix it. But I don't want to, for those people that are thinking differently, I don't want them to feel as if they have to think a certain way, right? You have the right to think any way you want. Now, maybe that might not conform to what the consensus is, but I still think it's important for people to speak their mind and to share their thoughts going forward. So we can philosophically disagree, and that's totally cool, but I think hopefully through our discussion, we'll get to, where we need to get to in a timely manner so we can present something as conclusive as we can. Yeah. Teresa.
Yeah, so I kind of like to reiterate again that I think that we could do it in 2 separate parts, and just making a recommendation about districts, we could probably do that pretty quickly, because are we going to recommend districts? And then there's one of 3 options. And that is encapsulated in of itself. It's not really a hard sell. It's not really got a big educational component to it. And then we can look at the voting methodologies and putting them on the ballot in separate election cycles may make sense for the city of Santa Clara too, because it's a lot to take on. And I think we can get some forward momentum by chunking it out into bite-sized pieces rather than looking at the whole, and you can build on the smaller steps. So that's what I would like to see us maybe moving forward to do.
And I think that sums up the difference of opinion, right? We all have a different way of looking at it and of solving it, and I just want to make sure that everybody has a chance to put their 2 cents out there. I would agree with the districting. I think the next agenda item will be to discuss the districting, because I think that's the low-hanging fruit. There really are only 3 options. For the most part, 2, 3, and 6 districts and so on. I'm sure we can complicate the heck out of it, don't get me wrong. But hopefully that's the low-hanging fruit, and the methodology is a little bit higher up the tree. So let me go to Keith and then Hussam or Saskia. Okay, so I'll go to Keith, Saskia, and Hussam.
I mean, I don't want to belabor the point or extend this, but we've talked about, are we fixing the problem? And again, I think the presentation tonight has seemingly boxed us in further in that we can't do this, we can't do this, maybe we can do this. You can box yourself in so much that you can no longer fix the problem that you want to fix. And if the problem we're trying to fix is Santa Clara's elections have historically been non-representative, then I was in this commission 6 years ago. We looked at districts. We did not think we could draw districts that would improve the representation of the city. So we can put districts on the election in June of 2018. The electorate can vote for that, 80%, 20%. We can have an election in November of 2018, and it will likely be as unrepresentative as the previous 30 years are. And the one 2 years after that, and the one 2 years after that will continue because districts are not likely to fix our representation problem, at least from the perspective of what the CVRA actually wants to make happen. Districts presumably do make the current lawsuit go away. Caveat, we're a charter city, not an at-law district. And so if the only problem we want to fix is to make the lawsuit go away, then we can Rochambeau, whether it's 2 districts or 3 districts or 6 districts, and we can leave here 10 minutes from now, and I'm sure the city attorney can draft a charter a charter amendment to that effect, and we'd be done. But we would not actually, I think, fix the problem that they've asked us to do, which is let's try and make our elections more representative. And that, I think, is some other election method, almost none of which we can do for 2018. And that's where the meat of the argument would be, which is if we can't actually do it for 2018, can we stage things so that we draw districts for 2018 and then we start some other election method starting in 2020?
That's to be discussed, but I would prefer we
discussed, right? But
Rochambeau, because that would be really embarrassing to tell the council we Rochambeau'd and we came up with 3.
They don't watch. They don't watch.
I'm just kidding. Okay, are you done, Keith? Saskia?
Okay, I just want to understand the issue that the county register has is the software program more than the state's not going to tell you that we now have to vote a particular way. They're not implementing a method of voting, are they?
That's correct. I mean, the states, in terms of if we're talking about like a method of voting being one of these things like ranked choice or whatever, right, the state is unlikely to tell us that we absolutely have to or absolutely cannot do one of any of these options. But just what's, right, the main restriction that we have right now is just our equipment can only handle certain options and cannot handle others. And then the state gets involved because our equipment has to be approved by the state. So it's not like we can just go out, I mean, in the same way that if you're dissatisfied with your computer, you can just go down to the store and buy another one. We can't do that.
And Matt, the reality is we wouldn't be able to give you a full-fledged answer until June because it would go on the June ballot. So when you look from June to November is not even 6 months.
It would actually be July, because you need 30 days to certify the June election.
Right.
So let's say 4 months. Okay.
Right?
Just want to throw that out there. Somebody, I'm sorry, Saskia, go ahead.
So a question, because there's got to be organisations that are already doing some of these choices and have that software. So I'm kind of like amused and bemused.
What I think they're saying is this: the state has standards for what is a free and fair election, and what's
I'm going to get you after
validatable to the public. And so using those standards, which we would be subject to, I mean, we wouldn't be, if the state is unable to certify the way the registrar is counting the votes because of the way we ask them to run the election, then we're the ones that are unable to tell our voters your vote was conducted and counted in a way that meets state standards for a free and fair election, and we don't want to do that. I mean, that's not what we want to do. We want to give them a ballot measure that says, you vote this way, and it is also valid under California law for a valid election.
Is there any other comment? Hassam, and I would like to get to Steve for 2 minutes because he's been at every one of our meetings, and I think what he has to say is appreciated. So Steve, why don't you take a couple minutes real quick, since he gave me a card quite a while ago, and then I'll get to Hassam.
Thank you, I'm going to go up to the head.
Thank you, because I didn't want you behind me. No, just kidding.
Right, no, you don't want me behind you, definitely not. My name is Steve Chesson, President of Californians for Electoral Reform. I just wanted to say that 2 districts of 3 members each, using either limited or cumulative voting, would satisfy both the spirit and the letter of the CVRA. You could do limited voting with 3 seats in 2018. Now, Keith pointed out to me that you only got 2 seats open. You would temporarily increase the size of the council by 1 person. One of those seats, the person who got the fewest votes, would only be in for 2 years. And then you could then adjust it for 2020 that there'd be 3 seats open, including that 2-year seat. So you could do that. It would work. And you would do limited voting in 2018, which the current equipment can easily handle. And then in 2020, you would switch to cumulative voting. And I do have a sample ballot. If you could just take one and pass all the way around. Let me keep one for myself. This shows a different mock-up that shows what happens when you've got 6 people running for 3 seats. It's a much shorter ballot. And I would highly recommend you do go to the 3 and 3 as opposed to the 4 and 2, because that makes the threshold of election 25% every single time. Any voting block of 25% will be able to elect somebody, whether it's limited voting or cumulative voting. That's the math of it. Limited voting is used in Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Alabama, North Carolina, Florida, Ohio, and Texas. Cumulative voting is used in Alabama, New York, South Dakota, Texas, Illinois, Delaware, Missouri, New Mexico, and many other states that I don't have time to mention. There was some comparison with Oakland. You got to remember, Oakland is 3 times the size of Santa Clara in population. So when you think about the cost of voter education, et cetera, take that into consideration. That's all I wanted to say. If you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you.
Since there was a little confusion, can you describe limited voting?
Yes, limited voting is where there's 3 seats up, and there may be 9 people running for those 3 seats, but you only get 1 vote. You can only vote for 1 person. And that has the same semi-proportional effect that cumulative voting has, but it doesn't, there's no confusion for the voter, because they're voting for 1 person, and the top 3 vote getters fill those 3 seats. So the counting of the ballots is very simple, and the existing equipment can easily handle it. It's a vote for 1 election, even though you're filling 3 seats. This is, well, in a 3-member district, what I'd be recommending would be 2 3-member districts. Divide the city in half. Half the people vote every 4 years. The other half vote every 2 years because they'd be voting in the mayor election when they're not voting for their district. Yeah. You could do it at large citywide, 3 and 3, but then there's some question of do you satisfy the CVRA requirement. So that's why I'm recommending the 3 and 3, because that gets you out of the letter of the CVRA, because you do not have an at-large system as defined by the CVRA. Any other questions?
Thank you. Hassam, actually, is your question for the?
No, it was a
Okay,
comment.
so is there any other, so these guys can go. Is there any other questions for Philip and Matt? So I want to thank you both for spending your evening with us tonight. I'm sorry you missed the Warrior game. We may not win it for 50 years, but at least you can tell your kids you were doing your civic duty when they won. Okay.
Hopefully you didn't tape it with the expectation you just watch it at home when you got there.
Yeah, oh, by the way, if anybody was taping it, I really apologize. Anyways, that's okay. Well, I just lost a few votes. Just kidding. So here's the question for the group. We have 20 minutes left. I'd like to transition into the districting discussion, because I think that's the low-hanging fruit that we need. That's the first thing we need, I think, to talk about, and I agree with what Teresa is saying. So my question is, do you want to have discussion around this, or do you want to table it until the next meeting and go ahead and adjourn?
Well, I want to still make my comment whether we.
No, yeah, you'll still get your comment.
Public presentation still to go?
Yeah, we still have public presentation.
We're only going to get a few minutes.
Yeah. Okay. So let me go to Mary first, and then I'll go to Hassan, because Mary hasn't had a chance to speak yet, so.
That's only because you all already said really great things. I was just going to say, I think we should table districting to the next meeting because of all the time limits. But I had one small comment about something Keith had said earlier about the point of the CRA. I think it is important to, though they are related, to distinguish the goal of having a more representative council and the goal of the CVRA, which is particularly to allow minority communities to elect the candidate of their choosing that may or may not be of the same ethnicity, language status, et cetera, as they are. I think we can all think of some members of the cabinet, for example, that might fit that cabinet. So that's all.
Thank you.
So my comment actually is, I think Steve stole some of the words right out of my mouth. But one of the things that we do need to keep into consideration, which he did propose a solution for, is that in 2018, as the current system that we have right now, without changing it, we are electing 2 members of council, right? Of course, it's 2 plus mayor, but we're electing 2 members of council. So obviously, we have to think about how we address that with whatever situation or whatever recommendation we make. In Steve's recommendation, he suggested that we would increase it by 1, and then in 2020 decrease it by 1, so that you would have 2 years where you would have 8 people up on the dais, which could work. You could still have, mayor breaks a tie if there's not a tie. Mayor doesn't vote. Something we could figure something out, right? But the point is. I'll explain it. No problem. I have no problem. But that's the first thing. The second thing is that. I actually, as we discuss next meeting, between districting or not, I don't think it's a good idea to disjoint districting and the method that we use when we district, because I think they go hand in hand. And in the spirit of fixing the problem for the long term, I think it's okay to say we're going to go to, like, for example, a 2-district city with three members per district, and in 2018, we're going to elect them this way. Maybe it's at large, maybe it's limited, maybe it's cumulative, all the ways that can be done. We have to be practical. It has to be something that can be done. And then in 2020, when we get the new system, maybe it's a second ballot question. Should we then transition to ranked choice or single transferable when the system allows it? But I think it would be doing a disservice to the spirit of the law to just say we're going to district, and then second ballot question, how do we do it in the future, if we even do it at all? But I think when we make the recommendation for 2018, we should include a method that does address the spirit of the law, which in this case would be either limited or cumulative, which the systems can handle.
Right. And I still think this is actually 2 issues. I think there are 2 separate things here. One of them is the lawsuit, that's the white elephant in the room. And some people may say, I don't want to change anything. I don't want to, that's to be discussed. But I think once if you resolve the districting, then you come up with a methodology, because now you have the districts and you know how it's going to be divided. And now you can come back and say, now that we've agreed that 2 districts would arguably work for Santa Clara because we're so diverse and there's no way to draw a line like we could in San Francisco, we have 2 districts. That satisfies the lawsuit based on what we've heard. So that's A. Now that we have these districts, what is going to be the most appropriate way to address diversity or to address that question? Because that's really the other big question. The two questions are the lawsuit and diversity. And that's the way that when I break it down into its common denominator, that really is what it comes down to, because the whole point from what I'm gathering, the whole point of looking at a voting methodology, at least initially, was because people didn't feel that the council was diverse. And so to call it anything other than what we're doing wouldn't be right. I mean, we are looking for the opportunity to make sure that it's fair for everybody, but that we're also factoring in different ways that might alleviate some of the questions and concerns that have been brought up because of an all-white council. So you're right and Teresa's right, but the truth is there are two separate things. Once you solve A, then you can go to B. But if you don't know what A is, you can't go to B. So it's kind of putting the cart before the horse the way that I see it. And from the meeting, I'd like to actually have the discussion of districting first. And then once we have that figured out, then we can figure out what is the best method, given all the information we have, given now that we have two districts, what's the best way of going about accomplishing the second part of what we've been tasked to do.
I'd just like to make two observations. One is, if you make a ballot measure that ostensibly goes to districts, but is so convoluted that the public says, I'm not voting for that, then you haven't solved anything. And number two, as far as I've heard, you have no evidence before you whatsoever that any of these voting methods would solve anything in terms of making the council more representative. I mean, I haven't heard anything. I mean, there's suppositions and theories and ideas, but as far as, you apply this to Santa Clara, I mean, I would not assume, because, this is public testimony being taken down, and people are making these statements, but I haven't heard any factual or any kind of academic anything that says you pick one of these other methods of cumulative or limited or ranked choice or single transferable, you apply that to Santa Clara's demographics and you get a different result than you would just by the straight old vanilla vote for your candidate.
I would challenge you on that, because I think some of the reports that we've seen that show that mathematically, if voters prioritize their choices based on race, that a proportional system will mathematically result in a council that is based on the priority of the voters. I think that's a mathematical fact. Now, whether voters in Santa Clara will prioritize based on race is a different story, but if the lawsuit assumes has a presumption of voters voting based on race, then a proportional system will address that. And I think we've seen
I think you're making this, you're extrapolating assumptions from other places where people vote much more along those lines.
But that's why I said if voters in Santa Clara.
Right, so I'm just saying, all I said was there's been nothing about the population of Santa Clara that has been introduced that would suggest that any of these other methods would be more likely to produce a different result. It just hasn't been, not specific to our population. Yes, in Texas, where you may have cohesive ethnic communities that consistently vote for a candidate of that cohesive nature, yes, maybe it does work where, they do vote and it results in a difference. I'm not saying it wouldn't in Santa Clara. I'm just saying
we'll never have the answer to that unless we do it. That's kind of what you're saying.
Well, I'm just saying, don't assume that it would result in something else. That's what I'm saying.
For this discussion, I think that's part of what we're going to get into. I'd rather table that for now because it's a philosophical difference between what Hassan and the attorney, and I think both are valid. But in order to get out of here at 9:30, I have to table that conversation until we start to talk about methodology. So I wanted to get to Jody and Keith, and then I have to go to public presentation. And Saskia, and then I have to go to public presentation in order for us to get out on time. Okay?
Well, first of all, I think that it is a philosophical thing. I think that there's some studies, and we've gotten all sorts of documentation that says there's evidence that ranked choice encourages people to vote more honestly. That's what I'm reading from this one. And I do think we need to talk about it, because we've gotten all this information so far, and we haven't really processed it as a group. And I think that is the next step. But I do agree that I think we can talk about the districting question first, and somebody, I think, made an assumption that we're talking 2 districts, and I'm not sure that 2 districts is the right number, and because I'm thinking, since we have 6, it's a very nice mathematical number, because you can divide it in lots of different ways, and I actually was thinking that 3 districts of 2 each, where each person is elected. See, every district has somebody every 2 years, I thought was a really interesting idea when we heard that before.
So based on that, though, I want to table that discussion, because that's going to be the next discussion.
Okay.
Was there something?
No, that's where I wanted to go, is I wanted to make sure that we had both of those discussions.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, I'm just going to.
So I would like to know if it's possible, in relation to the court case, the supposed court case, if there is a way to, they talk a lot about areas and that there's people that have been disenfranchised. Where do we see that on a map in Santa Clara? I would like to see that, because I don't think that we have any evidence for that.
And to add on to that.
We have that.
I have
We don't have to have a discussion tonight, but I would like to have that for the next
But
meeting.
on that topic, I was going to ask that staff provide us the demographic breakdown, because we don't have that, and we'll need that for the districting. So if you could put that in the packet for the next meeting. Thank you for bringing that up, because I actually have a note that I wanted to make sure we have something in front of us to make a logical, rational decision with. So was there anything else? Okay.
Well, it's the plaintiff's burden of proof to prove that, so I'm not going to be able to come in and provide his burden of proof. I mean, I'm defending the city, so I don't want you to believe that I'm going to be able to come in and provide his legal theories or factual support for his legal theories.
Okay. So Keith?
Motion to extend the time to allow each member of the public to talk for up to 2 minutes. Instantly, move now to public presentations and adjourn immediately afterwards.
Okay, so there's a motion to extend. All in favor? Okay,
Aye.
great, thank you. Okay, was that what you wanted to
That's it.
do?
That was all I wanted.
Okay, great. So I'll go back to to Mary? Oh, to Saskia, and then we'll go to public presentation. You're done. Okay, so I currently have 3 cards. I have Jeremy, Dave, and Steve. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? You don't have to give me a card, but I'd just like to know who you are. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with Jeremy. Jeremy, you'll have 2 minutes, and Rod will keep your time, so if you want to stand over there so you can see your time, wherever you want to stand, that's fine. And there's a mic there's a remote mic. There you go. Thank you. Just press the button, it'll go green. Okay, great,
Hi,
thanks.
I'm Jeremy. I'm a mathematician from Santa Clara County.
I don't think your mic is on. You want to use the one on the table?
Okay, it was on. Okay. I want to speak to the concern that proportional methods won't necessarily solve the problem. The problem in the case that was put forth was that Asian Americans make up 30% of the population of the city and do not have a single representative on a 7-member council. The mathematics of proportional representation say that systems that follow that, for a 7-member council, if any group makes up more than 1/8 of the population, they can, if they want to, guarantee themselves 1 seat. So any proportional system or method, including the ones that have been addressed and several others that exist would solve the problem.
And thank you for your point. Hypothetically, if there were 3 Caucasian and 1, say, non-Caucasian, by using one of these methods you just said, are you still confident that you would assure that the 1 non-Caucasian candidate would be elected?
No, I can guarantee that if the non-Caucasian population chooses to support the non-Caucasian candidate, they can guarantee their seat if they make up more than the appropriate percentage of the population. So if the non-Caucasian portion of the population votes for the non-Caucasian candidate, then they'll get their seat, if it's proportional.
But that also makes the assumption that 33% of the folks are actually eligible to vote, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we're drawing some, I'm just to clarify, because you make a good point, but just to clarify, just because you have 33% of the city that happens to be Hispanic or African American or Asian, that we make the assumption that every person in that class is eligible to vote, and we also make the assumption that I don't think has been proved in Santa Clara, that we don't always vote by race, but I do see what you're saying, kind of from the mathematics. If everything lines up, then you're saying that it should work.
The important part is not that, like, the Asian Americans make up a percentage of the population that votes for a candidate. The important part is that if the non-Caucasian candidate gets 33% of the vote, they should be able to, or they will get a seat. So the minority population doesn't have to be by race. It can be, as was discussed earlier, pro-growth people or North Side people or gay people or whatever. Any minority can guarantee them, any minority that chooses to work together to guarantee themselves a seat can do so.
Thank you. Dave? I don't want to...
Dave, just say Dave.
Dave.
Welcome back.
Okay, Dave Kadlachek, to repeat my name for the record. Several quick points about things that were discussed. Actually, gubernatorial elections may be longer than presidential elections because there's a bunch of statewide offices and judges and so forth that are on the ballot in those Novembers that aren't on the ballot in presidential elections. Second thing, the suggestion that something that has a conditional adoption of a new voting method is bound to fail goes against actual experience in that I'm sure about Oakland and Berkeley. I think San Leandro, all of their ballot measures to go to ranked choice voting were to do so when the registrar of voters would be able to support it as opposed to immediately. And that did not cause the measures to fail. Third thing, in the stuff about how long it might take for administrative approval for equipment and so forth, my guess is that the longer time and additional requirements might be necessary for administrative approval for an upgrade if we were going to ranked choice voting as used in Alameda and San Francisco, but to go to that upgraded version of the software just to be able to accommodate the possibility there would be more than 4 cards, but everything else would look the same. The only reason it would take longer than the minimum time or less to do that would be if someone in the Secretary of State's office was trying to sabotage the use of that, because it would be using something that's in use elsewhere for multiple things and not changing anything about how things appear to the voters in Santa Clara County to do that. Next thing, Steve was slightly off when he said that some voters would vote every 4 years and some every 2 years if we switched to the system he proposed, because he forgot that we elect the city clerk and the chief of police and citywide in the years when we don't elect mayors. And I guess my time's up, so I won't mention the other two things I was going to say.
So I see a turf war now. You know what, Dave? Yeah, I don't have a problem with it.
Okay. The other two things is on separating voting method from districting type stuff. Really, the question is whether to have two districts or multi-member districts or single-member districts really gets at the voting methodology thing. So if you were talking about that under districts, you would really be putting the election methodology stuff into it also. And the last thing is on whether the various proportional methods would work for dealing with representation issues. It doesn't address Santa Clara specifically, but the other states where cumulative voting and limited voting are used, almost all of those, if not all of them, were done as remedies to solve Federal Voting Rights Act lawsuits or prevent them.
Clarifying question? Can you clarify, when you said that if you go to single-member districts versus multi-member districts, that affects which method you can use? Which ones are limited to certain?
Well, if you were going to 2 3-member districts, for example, in order to avoid, if you were going to 2 3-member districts, you would have to be using one of the cumulative voting or single transferable vote or limited voting, one of those methods, in order for that to be addressing the representation problem. And because dividing into 2 districts wouldn't really, by just dividing into districts, significantly affect the representation problems, but that would address, dividing into 2 districts would address the letter of the CVRA. Changing the election methods while doing that would be what would address the spirit of it.
So there's not something that, by going into multi-member districts, that says you can't use one of these. It just, if you just do that, you haven't solved the problem. Is that what you're saying?
If you just do that, you wouldn't be addressing the representation issues if each of the districts was more or less the same composition as the city of the whole ethnically.
Exactly.
Thank you. Steve?
Yeah, I was a little bit blindsided when the city attorney said that there was no evidence that using limited or cumulative voting would solve that, because you haven't asked for any evidence yet at this point. I just did a quick search of the election results and what came up for the city of Santa Clara. What came up was 2012. In seat number 3, Debbie Davis got 61% of the vote. Oh, great, the page just went away. I hate when that happens. And Mohammed Nadeem got 38% of the vote. Well, 38% is more than 25. So in cumulative voting or limited voting, if Mohammed could get 28% of the vote, 38%, he would definitely win. Similarly,
But Debbie got 61. Why would he win? How would he have won?
Because there would have been.
cumulative voting lowers the threshold of election. So it only takes 25% of the voters voting for you to win.
But both of them had over 25%.
Yeah, well, she would have won too.
We only have 1 seat.
Well, I know, but I mean, if you extrapolate, you have to extrapolate. If Asian Americans are voting more than 25% for Asian American candidates, then you'll get an Asian American candidate.
If it was a
So citywide, everybody in this city is voting, right?
in a multi-member, not in this particular city.
I'm extrapolating from the numbers. I have that, 61% of the city voted for a Caucasian candidate, and 38% of the city voted for a non-Caucasian.
More
Okay.
specifically, if the candidates in seats, if the candidates, or if the voters that voted in seats 4 and 6, who had no ability to vote for Mohammed or Debbie. But if they also were divided to where 38% of them would have supported an Indian American candidate, then across the city, 38% of the voters would have voted for Mohammed. And he would have gotten above the level of...
Above the threshold, yes.
Above the...
Similarly, you had in seat number 4, Jerry Marsali received 72% of the vote. Alma Jimenez, who I assume is Hispanic, received 27% of the vote. Again, 27% is more than that 25% threshold. So you clearly have in the city of Santa Clara, more than 25% of the people wanting to see non-Caucasian candidates elected. And there's your evidence.
That's just, I'm sorry, but that's just simply not evidence. You have no idea why people voted for those people, and you have no idea who voted for those people. So that's just, that's an anecdote, but it's not evidence of anything.
Then I suggest that the committee ask staff to do a poll of the city to find out why people vote for the candidates that they vote.
I'm going to go to Mary. Mary actually had a comment real quick. So Steve, if you want to stay up, I don't know if it's addressed to you or not. I don't know.
I think my comment the moment may have passed, so, but I'm going to say it anyway, and, feel free to reflect if it's to you, but I'm not sure. But part of it is, I think, right to Brian's point, that, it's not quite right to say that if you look at the past election results, you'll know that there's, sort of the right kinds of folks to line up for future elections. Also, for everybody who's really confused by it, it is a sort of assuming that we're going to move to some sort of multi-member system, right? Otherwise, and relatedly to Jody's earlier question, I think some of the voting methods we've talked about assume multi-member districts, and some of them could work in either multi-member or single-member election. So the districting question is somewhat inevitably connected to the voting methods, because if we went to 6 single-member districts, there are some voting methods that are just off the table.
Well, you can look at places where they have used cumulative or limited to solve voting rights lawsuits and see that, yes, the protected groups are successful in getting candidates of their choice elected in those situations. Now, if you want to have evidence that this would solve the problem in Santa Clara, I don't know how you get that evidence without actually conducting an election under one of those systems. So it's kind of like you're setting up a catch-22 there.
Yeah, I still think that there's a lot of assumptions in what you're saying. A lot of assumptions. I think the first assumption is that people vote in this city based on their race or their national origin. And even Marcus Bracamonte said it best. He said, I had support of a lot of Portuguese people, and I'm Portuguese, and I'm, of course, we're joking, but I'm like, well, how did that happen? So I think we make assumptions, and I don't know if this is because of the national discussion or whatever, is that people are going to automatically vote for the person because it's the same race or the same national origin, and I think that's a dangerous assumption to make. I don't think we are the most, next to New York City, we are the most diverse county in the country. And so to say that an Indian will vote for an Indian and a Caucasian will vote for a Caucasian, I think kind of diminishes the spirit of why we are who we are. And so I would just caution when people make a point that it's black and white, and I really don't feel it is. And that's my personal opinion, but I think you're shortchanging people's intelligence. To say that if I see somebody whose last name is similar to mine, then I have to vote for this person. Quite honestly, that says that people can't think for themselves. That says that people aren't rational. That says that people aren't able to look at what the platform is. Perhaps that platform is not what I agree with. So I just want to be careful that we don't make the assumption that because like name to like name or color skin to color skin is going to automatically come to a conclusion that this is how people vote.
Your point is well
Jody.
taken.
I just wanted to suggest, since there's some people in this committee who are really good at this, is that for the next meeting, people Google around and find some studies. And bring some proof, bring the study and be ready to talk to it about why you thought that this study was particularly good and what it's saying, and be able to justify the results of that study and how it might apply to our city. Don't just bring in a study that says, hey, ranked choice is good, but please be ready to talk to it, because I know there's a number of people in here who are quite good at Googling and could find us those studies.
And I would ask if anybody does have a study they'd like to discuss, that we send it to Rania, so the public can also have that, and they can also digest it. I would also say that when you look at studies, I think that's a fantastic example, but I also want to make sure that the study isn't the minority, because if you have a study that says, look, here's where it worked, you also have to factor in where it didn't work. So I just want to make sure that when we do our research, that we balance it out to make sure that it's truly representative of either being successful or not. Because I'd like us to look at the big picture when you give something to Rania. But thank you, yes, that's absolutely what I think we should be doing, and I think there are certain people that are very good at doing it. So please send it to Rania. Hassan, you've got 30 seconds, and then we're going to...
Not to poo-poo on the suggestion, because I'll bring whatever I need to bring, but no study will tell us what Santa Clara is like, right? I mean, ultimately, any of these proportional systems are proportional based on what people care about when they make a decision. We will never be able to come up with a study that says Santa Clarans vote based on X or Y or Z, whether it's race or pro-development or soccer or 49. It's not about that. It's what do you prioritize, and based on how you prioritize, you will get a proportional a council that is representative based on the proportions of how others in the city prioritize. One of those issues could be race, but I don't think any of us can be successful in finding a study that says, yeah, in Santa Clara, voters will vote based on X and Y and Z without actually conducting an election or conducting a poll. But absent that, no study will prove that.
I don't think any study can actually be specific to Santa Clara, but if somebody wants to make a point and somebody wants to show how it's worked in other places, you can then decide if this is relevant for Santa Clara, and maybe you come up and say this is apples and oranges and it doesn't make sense. But maybe you come up with a study that's apples to apples or pretty close, and then you can have a discussion. So I don't want to squash people wanting to go out there and look and see if there's something that would contribute positively to the discussion. But you're 100% right. I don't think any of us can find a Santa Clara, because there is no city, probably...
Sunnyvale is just like Santa Clara.
But we're pretty unique.
We're better, but they're just like us.
Our demographics are very unique. So anyways, can we get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second? Steve seconded? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.